Hi, good evening again. It's still Sunday, October 4th, and I duplicated the last chapter. So I wanted to read an extra little bonus one to actually be the right chapter for today. Rope Across the Sea from Rye on the Rocks. Never one of Rye's great summer palaces, it is a small boarding house that serves as our present day reminder of Rye's claim to international fame. And I'm just going to check with you. This is from the 19. So I'm just going to check the publication date so we can remember when it was printed. Yes, 1962. So present day at the time was 1962. It was to this building that was connected the first totally underwater cable to link Europe and the United States. It would be incorrect to designate this building as the first cable station, as it was to a nearby shed that were directed the first direct cable tidings of Europe. However, the building now known as the Historic Cable House was constructed the following winter and served for over 35 years as the doorstep of the daily doings of Europe. Just how Rye Beach became settled upon as the landing place for the Atlantic cable is not known. However, it is known that a number of the prominent townspeople, realizing the importance and distinction which the cable would bring to their town, on May 11, 1874, circulated a petition in favor of Rye's sponsoring a celebration in honor of the cable's arrival. As was the custom at that time, a special town meeting was called for June 2nd to act on the proposal. However, few people showed enough interest to bother to show up at the town hall. Just why the meeting was boycotted is not known. It was a busy time of year for the farmers, and as the signers of the petition were generally hotelmen who stood to benefit from the potential tourist attraction, perhaps it was just another example of the farmers and the beach folks being two distinct camps. At any rate, only 10 legal voters were present, and the meeting was indefinitely postponed. Although there was to be no official celebration, local interest was running high as the day of the cable's arrival approached. Not only were the local populations preparing for the great day, but national magazines such as Leslie's Illustrated newspaper sent writers and artists to Rye in order to capture the event for distribution throughout the country. However, a reporter writing for a Boston newspaper, who was conducting a general tourist survey of the area at that time, reported that although the arrival of the cable was a thing of momentary expectancy, there was no sign of preparation for its reception, either in the form of a public demonstration, a building to serve as a telegraph office, or anything of that sort. As a number of Atlantic cables had been broken and lost during the crossing, it is quite possible that its backers decided not to invest any money in a receiving station until the cable had actually been landed and proved to be workable. Local interest was running high on June 6th. And I'm just going to refresh my memory. Let's see. 1874, June 6, 1874, when news was received that the new cable ship Faraday had begun to lay cable between Tor Bay, Nova Scotia, and Rye Beach. Evidently, this first trip of the Faraday was quite uneventful, for only a few days later, the cable layer was sighted off the Isles of Shoals, and news was spread that the shore end would be landed at once. It was a field day for sightseeing steamer owners, as everyone wanted to get a close look at the giant cable ship. The Appledore was run on alternate days from Portsmouth and Dover at 50 cents per fare, and the steamer, Queen of the Merrimac, came up with a full load from Newburyport. However, except for viewing the Faraday, there was little to see, for as a result of its great size, the Faraday could not get close enough to shore to successfully land the shore end of the cable. For that reason, it was to be the task of the smaller steamer, Ambassador, to bring in the shore end. The Ambassador had been scheduled to arrive at Rye Beach at the same time as the Faraday, but she had been held up by bad weather in the South Atlantic, so in the days before wireless, all the Faraday could do was wait. The first days were quite routine, but as each day's wait was costing the company owners a great deal, when the Ambassador did not arrive by the 14th, the Faraday decided to go and lay the leg of the cable between Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, and return to Rye within 10 days to assist the smaller ship in laying the heavier shore end. Weighing 8 tons per mile, it was, of course, only a few hours after the sailing of the Faraday that the second steamer arrived from the south. So this time it was the Ambassador that anchored for the wait in Portsmouth's lower harbor. Had it been a month of summer calm, this wait would have been of little incident, but the weather was dead set against the laying of the first ocean cable between the old and new worlds. It was a week of violent winds, and although anxious to see their end of the cable landed, local inhabitants could see that an attempt in such weather would be foolish. Disaster was in the winds a few nights later when the Ambassador broke her moorings and began drifting out to sea. However, it was but a short while before the tug, Clara Bateman, had a line aboard, and the smaller cable ship was once more safely inside the lee of Portsmouth Harbor. Disaster might have been averted locally, but things were not certain as to the fate of the Faraday. It was known even in Portsmouth that a heavy gale had hit the cable base at Tor Bay, blowing down many of the tents and destroying much of the equipment. The Faraday was a strong ship, but being at sea and unheard from for many days, with a rescue fleet being unsuccessful in locating her, it was assumed that the giant steamer had been lost. Word was sent to the company offices in London that the ship had been lost, and for a while the direct U.S. cable company seemed to be on the brink of disaster, with the loss of its $1 million cable-laying vessel. But just when things seemed darkest, it was none but the Faraday, in perfect condition, that was sighted off the Isles of Shoals. It seems that the cable layer had been held up for many days by almost impenetrable fog. It was only after the Faraday's safe arrival that the captain of a vessel that had arrived in Portsmouth, amid all the fears of the disaster, reported that he had passed the British ship at the time it was reported lost, but had not thought the matter important enough to so report on his arrival in Portsmouth. As the fog had caused expensive delays, it was felt that the shore end would be landed immediately, and a crowd of hundreds began to assemble on Straws Point early on the morning of the 13th. However, there were still to be delays, and after a day of waiting, the throng went home with little to show for their enthusiasm but a gay social gathering, to view the trench which had been dug through the sand to receive the 2.5-inch wire rope. It was indeed a curious assortment of silk-bustled ladies from the Farragut and rubber-booted fishermen from Sandy Beach who had gathered on Straws Point to witness the historic event which was about to bind the nation to a motherland from which it had so bitterly been severed just 100 years previous. Most of the crowd reappeared the following morning and were finally rewarded about 3 p.m. when the ambassador was seen to move out to where the deep-water cable was buoyed off the Isles of Shoals. However, once more there were delays to be experienced, and once more much of the crowd had dispersed by 9 o'clock that evening, when at last the spliced cable had been loaded onto a barge and the final voyage to shore begun. Leslie's reported that it was a very dark night, and the procession of boats with their lanterns formed a gloomy appearance as it moved through the stillness broken by the heave-ho of the cable hands, and the wild, uncouth songs with which they accompanied their clock-like motions as they worked along the ropes. As the boats neared the shore, a number of men went out into the surf to meet it. 100-gun salute was fired from 2 small cannon borrowed from Kittery, and for those of the reception group remaining, it was a scene of gay excitement as the ladies of the Farragut assisted the reporters and fishermen haul the cable through the trench and up onto the beach. The Leslie's article, although inaccurate, goes on to say that the cable was then spliced to the instruments, and with a hearty Yankee cheer, the completion of the task was announced. The ship's crew was reported to have returned to the ambassador immediately, which by daybreak was on its way over the horizon. Although reported to be immediately in operation, that was not quite the case. The short leg from Nova Scotia to Rye was the first section laid, so it remained for the Newfoundland to Ireland leg to be laid, and then a year of testing before the cable was ready for commercial operation. In the meantime, the 2-story cable station was built at Rye Beach and the operators sent over from England. The time of the cable's arrival had been a time of gay celebration, but very shortly the British operators became integrated into the local structure, and the station became another tourist attraction. For many years, the company remained under its original owners, then for a number of years under the control of the U.S. government, the British Empire, and during its last years, leased by the Western Union Company. Probably the greatest periods of activity for the cable occurred during the First World War, when on Saturday, August 8, 1914, the Rye cable station established a record for transmission service, sending messages totaling 30,000 words. One of the fastest transmissions on record was the 10-second message between Rye and Berlin, Germany, when Professor Elliott sent the results of the Harvard-Yale football game to friends in the German capital. Although greatly supplemented by telephone cables, code cables are still in use, but the Rye station was not destined to be one of the late survivors. The Rye cable was modified to receive messages by sound, as well as the original tape, and it was a duplex cable, meaning that messages could be sent and received simultaneously, but other cables evidently proved more efficient. The final contract with England had supposedly been with the understanding that the British would keep the entire cable in repair, but it had reached such an age as to make its maintenance uneconomical. Only the previous summer, a cable ship had been in the area for a number of weeks, repairing a break between Rye Beach and the Isles of Shoals. In 1918, the local cable business began to go downhill, and by 1921, the international marriage was dissolved. Buggies were gone, boardwalks were going, and the rope to Europe was broken and dead. So, next up, next week, next Sunday, what do you do in the winter? Uh-oh, reminding us of winter. And with that, I will bid you good night.